Hello and welcome to Knitting 101 Techniques Untangled. Here's where we take you through a series of 8 classes designed to build your confidence and help you on your knitting way. In this class, we're going to talk about blocking and what that means. Okay, so we're going to talk about blocking. Now that's a word that you hear as a new knitter and think, what in the world are people talking about? And essentially it's just the practice of washing and laying your fabric out to dry, usually on your finished object, but sometimes you'll want to do it before you seam pieces together. And essentially what we're talking about is washing your fabric. So I've got some swatches here with some different stitch patterns on them, and we're just gonna talk through how to block, the basics of it, and some tools that could be useful for blocking. So the first thing I'm gonna do is just look at a very plain stocking stitch swatch. And what you want to do is, if you're finished with your project, you're going to wet block it. And that's my preference. So I've just got a bowl of water here. You could use some wool wash, but if I put suds in here, you wouldn't be able to see the swatch in the water. So you'll just have let that soak for, let's say, 10 or 15 minutes once it's a full garment. You want to make sure that the fabric is completely saturated with water. That's not actually that saturated, so we're just going to leave that in there. And just a cool or like tepid water is fine. Right, so once this has been in for 10 or 15 minutes, sort of depending, you're just going to gently squeeze your fabric. Now, I have a tiny swatch here, so this is relatively easy. It is a bit more difficult when you have an entire sweater in your hands, but you want to be very gentle and you don't want to wring the wool out. So I'm just going to put that to the side. Now for the towel bit. You're going to take a towel, regular towel, and you'll lay your swatch in the towel. Obviously, with a big whole sweater, you need a bigger towel. And then we're just gonna roll that up gently, and we're just gonna press down on it. Again, if I have an entire sweater rolled up in a towel, then I will stand on it and I will squish it around with my feet, because you wanna get sort of as much moisture out of it as possible, and just be really gentle because you don't want to overstretch your fabric. So now I've gotten sort of most of the moisture out of that, but I still have wet fabric, like it's still very malleable. So what you mostly want to do with a sweater and stocking stitch is just a really gentle block. You want to make sure the stitches are sort of evened out and pin it into place just really simply, and like in this case I want a square. So I'm going to use some T-pins. Any old sewing pins will really do. If you have a large project, a magnetic maker's keep that will hold your pins is super useful. And I'm just going to stick the pins into the corners for this swatch, because I'm not really trying to do anything to the fabric. I just want it to stay nice and flat and leave it to dry. So that's sort of a basic blocking that you'd want to do for like a plain stocking stitch sweater that you're not trying to like stretch into shape or show any pattern detail on. All right, so I'm back on this swatch. We initially just laid it out quite delicately, but I want to sort of show you what I could do to this fabric, because it's still quite wet. I could decide that I want to block this really aggressively, or if I have stitches that are uneven from my knitting, I can take this time to like really even out the stitches, which takes your hand knit item from looking homemade to handmade and beautiful. Like it really does finish off your project quite incredibly. So I'm just gonna, and I would end up, by the time this is dry, the fabric would feel very different on an aggressive block than it does on a gentle block. And so that's something you might want to explore in your knitting. especially for a woolen spun fiber like the one I'm pinning out right now. And you can also see how it's grown. So sometimes if maybe the sleeve is just like a tiny bit too short, I might tug on it in blocking to make it long enough. And if you are wondering what I am pinning into here, this is the Coco Knits Knitters block. They come in a set of 18 and they're like a puzzle piece. So for a larger item, you can connect them together. All right, so I have a slightly more delicate lace sample this time because I'm going to show you how blocking lace work is a bit different because you're looking to open up the lace work. So I've had that soaking. And again, I'm just going to gently, it's all about being gentle. You want to get as much moisture out as you can so it's not dripping, but do not wring it. It's not good for the fabric. So I will again take my towel. I will lay that out, roll it up, and then just gently squish as much excess fabric or excess moisture out of it as I can. Now, this has some lace work in it, and with lace work, you want to see those holes. So I'm going to block this much more aggressively than I did the stocking stitch swatch. So I'm going to need more pins. And what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to use some of these, which I really like. They're blocking, I'm going to forget the name now. They're knit blockers from Knit Pro. This is the rainbow set because they're fun and colorful. And instead of using several pins, I can just use that once. And then I'm going to put a pin in each corner because I'm going to get a bit more aggressive down at the bottom. And what you want to do is you can pin and repin a few times because the fabric's going to move. And what you want to do, so I've got little points and I want to make sure those are nice and exaggerated. So I'm going to just start pulling those down. All right, so I've pulled the peaks out, but it's sort of drawing in a bit. So I'm gonna use another of these guys and I'm just gonna pull that out to the side and get that to open up a bit more. And it really depends on what you want your finished item to look like. You can manipulate the fabric quite a bit. This is what we would refer to as aggressive blocking. Like I've stretched the fabric quite a bit to open that up. And see how that's like not quite straight? I can sort of like pull at stuff while it's wet and just get it to be, and you can just move these around. If you're like, nah, that's not quite right, I can go a bit further and adjust. And now we're just gonna wait until they dry. That is the blocking process. We now wait until it dries and we pull it off the mats and it's ready to wear. For a lace item, like a lace shawl, you're gonna want to do this process every time you want to wash the sweater or the shawl or the lace item because you need to open those holes back up. And for other sweaters and stocking stitch items, it might not be as important to like really do an official blocking, but like just to lay it out flat to dry. And that is blocking. There are a load of other videos in the series for you to watch. I highly recommend the swatching video if you haven't watched that already because it relates really directly to blocking. Thanks for watching and happy knitting.